when you look at a villain, the one thing you expect the most is the fact that they're going to be defeated. Like, no matter where a story is brought forth, you're always going to expect them to lose. Of course, there are very rare instances where they win, but that also comes through a prolonged story of different sequels where they still get defeated because that's still their purpose for living a bad life that does not value any good. It is simply just the expectation that we learn through the course of the hero, where we take nothing from the bad since it would affect it in many different ways. And the biggest method to defeat a villain would of course be to kill them, to simply just let them die as the hero continues to live on in their journey in the message of happily ever after depending on its type of story. And Disney itself is famed for doing such things even though not every story has really done that, including recent years where they just get arrested or trapped in some form, where it's not the most common thing to do, but it certainly is the most popular thing to do. And also the fact that most villain deaths simply consist of them falling off the ledge to their death since they took the wrong step to kill their own foes, where that is hardly different from most of what they do. However, in the course of learning about villains and their stories, they are actually pretty powerful moments that represents the entire hubris of a character, wishing too hard only to fall flat. That even though some villains aren't really different or too complicated in its approach to dying, its meaning can transform a story from good to great on the circumstances which they were built from. That each death holds a distinct meaning to not just the villain itself, but the hero in the reflection of who they are or what they can bring, and the lesson of what can happen if they were on the other side. And because I talk way too much about these things, I thought it was the perfect time to highlight some of these deaths and why they are so brilliant. Again, this is something that starts way back with the first Disney film and the evil queen that started it all, that strictly had her just fall to her death. And this is perfect because Snow White was just the simple basis of everything from good-hearted characters to the pure evil ones when you know the story. Everyone already knows the evil queen wants to be the fairest of them all and wants to kill Snow White for selfish reasons to achieve that goal. But because she was still alive, she had to resort to much more darker methods as the movie progressed, turning herself into an old ugly hag to offer Snow White a death-like sleep through these poisonous apples, trying to appear so kind in this ugly appearance, which turns out to be her true nature in contrast to her beautiful but very cold exterior. That her true design gets revealed by turning into this hag, laughing in the face of her foes like the Doors for trying to stop that until she gets pushed by them to the top, trying to get a boulder to crush them, but how a lightning strike comes down and causes her to fall to her death instead. Again, something that is just so simple where you just see her fall and the boulder too, which presumably crushes her entire body as soon as it of course lands. But even while that remains to be so basic, appearing just like that, it's also very perfect in such execution for her own character, for trying to do everything to kill someone for her own personal gain, but slowly revealing the truth and hubris that came alongside with it. That in order to reach the top of pure beauty, she fell straight to the bottom, appearing as she really felt underneath that thick skin into a mangled corpse, crushed by the weight of her own sin. Like, if you really want to tell a perfect fairy tale, this would actually be the way to do it, contrasting the sides of basic good and evil and the layers that come from within it, and what we're going to keep learning as these villain deaths progress, which in fact was the only major villain death in any of their films until Maleficent came in Sleeping Beauty. Everything else in between was just simply defeated as you would think to differentiate their own story's tone. But Maleficent's death, on the other hand, just like her own character itself, became the pinnacle of the Disney villain defeat, the one that we all know today. The major image of good versus evil as Philip tries to combat her own efforts to ruin the kingdom, that we know she holds all this power and has everyone under her own grasp until he escapes to break the curse, which causes her true evil power to show up and transform into a monstrous dragon, where she was the first villain to actually be killed in that sense of someone stabbing them, where the sword with the fairy's magic caused the final blow to cause her own demise. Something similar in vein to like a David vs. Goliath story, with this puny human going against this big demonic creature who thinks she has the control over everything, but how good always finds a way as she collapses down into pure nothing. Again, relatively simple just like the evil queen, yet so good to continue a fairy tale pursuit of ending evil's reign over this entire world. That all the powers of hell just bring nothing but death to its user, which they all deserve. And again, we would have to wait until another long period of time until another villain will meet its demise in the Black Cauldron, where when you have someone appearing as threatening as the Horned King, you would assume he would meet such a dark end with what he tried to do, raising an army of the undead and appearing just like he does. The Cauldron in this film is a very powerful force where its power can be stopped if someone climbs into it, which happens and consumes anything near its path, including the Horned King himself, ripping him apart like he was an Indiana Jones villain in the darkest Disney villain death to date, consuming him with pure fire and crushing his skeleton into dust. That sometimes, in a film like this, we can go as hard as we want to represent our own villain's death, even if the story isn't that great, where your ultimate goal is your ultimate demise, just like the past two villains showed, consumed by all the powers of hell that give but also take away for actually using that. Where surprisingly enough, this also set the stage where the next set of Disney films would just constantly have a death of a villain, where you think of Ratigan falling to his death because of how loud Big Ben was due to his own feral rat state, Sleggs getting hit by an oncoming train when he was distracted, removing the heroes off of his own self, and his dogs getting electrocuted, where we then finally reach the Renaissance as the peak of how to kill a villain, where I think Ursula was the new benchmark in how to remove a villain in a modern fairy tale, by just exactly giving them what they wanted this entire time. That you let her taste the pure power of the Seven Seas by becoming so big with Triton's power, but also so small in not seeing the bigger picture as Eric stabbed her to death by a broken ship. Like, it's the perfect way that you let her win since she was too late for the kiss on the boat alongside manipulating Triton to save his daughter, yet also how you can prove that she's not invincible for holding such a size and power. Because, well, of course, you can't fall off a cliff since you're in the open ocean, but you can use what was sunk underneath to pierce your destructive habits. Of course, that doesn't mean you can't use water to have a villain fall down somewhere like in The Rescuers Down Under, proving just that by McLeach thinking he escaped until he fell down that waterfall. A scene I like for the fact that Joanna waved goodbye to him as his fate was sealed. But how this all culminated into using a clever use of the basic Disney villain falling to their death trope, which would actually be in Gaston's own death as he tried to kill the beast. Like, in his efforts to be the handsome man he thought he was, he became the true beast, where stabbing the beast was his biggest mistake because he was too focused on that picture on the ledge where he fell to his own death, with the clever clue that the animators put into his eyes as the lightning flashed with skulls that confirmed he did die, that his fate was finally sealed. I mean, technically, no villain has ever survived a fall that high in any of their films, but there is that confirmation of what needs to be, to remove the real monster that was there all along, leeching off of it, but only for it to destroy itself. That the Renaissance just kept going hard when it came to destroying their villains, with the Lion King next up and Scar's kingdom being toppled, where the clever thing about this is the fact that he too also falls, but how it's small enough where he can't get killed by it, but by the hyenas he used to execute his plan, revealing the truth of how he thought nothing of them despite their help, where he couldn't have actually done it without them in some way, and how he gets the brutal death of being eaten alive, killed in this gruesome fashion that of course has to be off screen, yet very much deserved for what he did to his own family, like killing his brother and potentially almost killing his nephew, where he just bit off more than he could chew in the way he wanted to be king, contrasting with Simba's own desires and why Mufasa was the leader in the first place, where the only real way that could be put down is if it was eaten from the inside. Like, think of the way he was consumed by jealousy and hatred of what his brother had compared to his own figure, and think about the fact he just kept being consumed by that for his whole life until he physically got consumed by the hyenas attacking them. Like, that is the best types of death when it really goes dark for it, where the animation from Disney should try to do more, that we need these types of death to prove why this does exist and why we need to avoid those fates, just like avoiding any real ones like Froolo, who I consider to have the best Disney villain death due to my own bias of being my favorite Disney villain. That this one was the real peak of a Disney villain falling to their death, with a perfectly crafted environment that matches their own character's descent, that he tries to be a holy man but does everything that is exactly the opposite in every single way, jealous at the devil's hold over himself and lusting after Esmeralda, trying to burn down her in the fires of hell until Quasimodo stops him, where the molten lead spreads around Notre Dame as he grows even more crazier to attempt to kill them all. His defecation of the church with his sword was also the final straw when the gargoyle beneath him crumbles and comes alive to drag him down into the molten lead, which now represents hell itself. That this isn't just someone falling to their death, it's literally someone being dragged down to suffer eternal damnation forever and ever, as we get the concept of heaven and hell and the life that God gives to us, trying to save it from our own sinful nature, which Froolo never stopped to see. Like, you look at the circumstances being brought forth with religion being mentioned in this very film, you can see that this character actually does not want to die or submit to that sinful fate, but proves everything worth of having a death, which, looking at that way, death can be described to be a separation, a broken connection connection to God, who is life itself, and the respect it deserves through others like Quasimodo and such, and why it has to happen because he goes through that separation. I know I went a little deeper with this compared to others, but it does represent everything important in showcasing when a villain needs to die, where they just need to learn a lesson because their evil is just too big to keep alive for good to really flourish. And moving on from that, you had Shan Yu from Mulan, who uses brute force but was matched by Mulan's intelligence and problem-solving skills to use the environment around her to her advantage, like removing his army and then himself being stuck to his sword and pushed by a rocket carrying firecrackers to explode him to death. Like, something as small as that showcases the strength of a hero to solve more than just physical means, vesting in agile knowledge and what she brings that is the best a hero could do beyond what society really thinks or tells them they could be. And then on to Tarzan, you have two villain deaths of Sabor and Clayton, who Tarzan overcomes their beastly nature, finally putting down the one who killed all of their families, and then also the other one trying to prevent becoming such a beast despite his civilized nature, in yet another brutal Disney villain death of being hanged by his own doing. That, like I expressed or explained before with characters like himself, you peel back those layers of humanity of a character, of one that has to reveal their true self-nature despite having one appearance being so civil to actually becoming a beastly monster who cares nothing but the death of others for their own personal gain, where just killing them off is the best solution to prevent further harm that they could have done, and the fact that Tarzan actually wanted to save him from doing so, revealing where his true nature also lied as that hero and contrasting what happens to its villain. And now we bring us to the last remaining major deaths of recent times, starting off with Rourke, whose greed for profitable treasure became his own undoing, turning him into the thing he wanted to sell, where he grabbed Kita's crystallized form to sell as a valuable weapon to foreign nations before getting slashed by Milo Thatch to turn into such a thing that caused him so much pain and shattered him into a million pieces that would never be fixed or remembered, teaching you not to steal the life of others or get stolen from you. Or maybe like Facilier, don't make deals with the devil because it will come back to bite you if you can't repay it off. Using this voodoo magic for his own monetary gain, controlling the city with the promises of souls to them, but sadly broken both physically and metaphorically to drag his unpaid debt back to the underworld to suffer alongside with them. Something similar to Froolo, but also done in a way where he doesn't literally die in front of you as he does get dragged down below, but also never returning to the surface world as his grave showed. That sometimes death can be actually explained in a clever way that you show it, appearing and then disappearing from this plane completely as you enter the next tortured fate that nobody really wants to know is really like. Or again, how you go back to the basics by modernizing it with the characters like Mother Gothal, returning those classic Disney villainess traits, but also added with a layer of someone who is already at the end of their own life, falling out of the tower only to be dusted since her dependence on her hair was like a drug where it shortened your lifespan greatly without using it, hence why she became dusted like everyone else. A great twist on that typical villain death where she doesn't even hit the ground before turning into ash, as all humans will eventually do where old age comes from. Like, she already comes from that place of being that character that is old enough on the verge of actually dying, but actually became youthful by using this power, but how that power actually rapidly speed the process to her own death. Where this finally brings us to our final mainstream Disney villain death with Turbo/King Candy, who thought he could evade his fate originally by jumping and rewriting another game where people thought he was dead, but how he just hid himself well out of his own jealousy. That despite all his efforts too to preserve his own character and selfish popularity, he also got consumed by his own actions that he caused, albeit done by another character who is also villain based, who actually jumped like he did to become a hero instead, as he got eaten at first but now transformed into a cybug, but also finally killed off by the traits he inherited from those very characters, dying in a soda explosion just for good. That when you shut the plug off, even in a video game, characters can die from their own idiotic actions, which is what they deserve as their time has passed in the ever-moving progress of technology, or what you expect when you represent those worlds. Unfortunately, that also remained to be the last Disney villain death 13 years later, where there has been nothing from the main studio except straight up defeats if they go to jail or just get trapped somewhere else, which makes me so mad in so many ways. Like, the importance of also making this video is to remind us that villains deserve to be pure evil and also deserve to die because of it, where we shouldn't back away from having them to be killed just because we wrote them to be more complex or sympathetic, where there's just so many ways to have them be defeated by their own hubris or intentions that will never win in a good society. It's fine to still have them not die like some of these previous films or even the earlier films have done. They are all great in their own way depending on their character, but we should also have them face the dark consequences of their nature for being against what life is really about, what it means to live at all according to all the good definitions, and why we exist in this world. And they still remain to be just as popular as the characters themselves, where people look back on these films with the hope that we remind ourselves for positive reasons why it may be, so we can live on the good side rather than what can potentially await us on the other path. So I'm not ready to be all done with any villain deaths, ready to find out what comes next.